What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Representing the Resin. My name is Jameson Wellborn. Today, we are joined by Nathan, better known as Blowtoke Smoke. Nathan, thank you so much for taking the time, bro.
Well, thanks for having me.
And, hey, man, it's an absolute pleasure. We were just talking offline, and I told you, I've known about your products and your work long before I've known about you. And I know you your answer was that's the way I like it. And I think that, that's similar for a lot of individuals in your position. But I think it's cool with the times changing that we're able to have shows like this and kind of showcase and tell the stories of people behind the products that so many of us have come to know throughout the years. So before we jump into, what you have going on in your garden, your varietals, the work you've done with Living Earth, I just want to take it back. I want to learn more about you. Where'd you grow up? Where were you born?
I was born in a small town in Watrous, Saskatchewan. Super tiny town. Wasn't there very long. We moved because my dad wasn't going to get the position that he wanted in that town. So we moved to a small town in southern Alberta, which is not far from where I am now, which is kind of where I grew up. I grew up between the two towns because my parents were split up. And I just grew up playing hockey, soccer, baseball, and then eventually lacrosse. And I was big into sports when I was younger. So
what was high school like for you? Was the plant present for you at that point, or was it later in life that you connected with the plant?
No, I was pretty straight and narrow in high school. I didn't start smoking until I was 19, but I have 3 older brothers and an older sister, and they all consumed cannabis. So I knew of it. I wasn't for it and I wasn't against it. I was just in my own world. I was really into video games at this point. So no, it wasn't in my life at all in high school. I think I saw it once or twice in high school. Yeah.
And it wasn't there was no negative connotation. There was no positive connotation. It was just kind of there, and you were aware that, it existed.
Yeah, basically, with my brothers having consumed it and, knowing that they weren't crazy or anything like what school was trying to tell you. It was okay, it's just another thing that I don't do because I never drank and I never smoked cigarettes either. So I was like, oh, I'll just add that to the list, right? So
yeah. So what was it that prompted you to start consuming what happened after high school for you?
So after high school, I was just doing some odd jobs or whatever, and then my brothers actually landed a job building a skate park in a nearby town. And it was out there, up to that point, my curiosity was probably growing a little bit with cannabis, and I was wanting to try it. And there it seemed like the perfect opportunities with my brothers. There was a guy from BC there, and, they were passing around a joint, and I was like, I'll hit it, right? So I smoked it, and I didn't get super high that day. I only had a few puffs, but then the next day we had a guy helping us, and he was from BC. And he had hash oil or, some kind of oil, and he laced the joint with that. And then, I was super high that day. And I don't think I haven't smoked since.
It was just that was it. And, every day since then, it's kind of been like a medicine.
Pretty much. Yeah, I was hooked. I have an addictive quality or addictive whatever, qualities where I get right into everything, and that's how it was with sports, and then it was video games, and then it was cars, and then right now, it was becoming cannabis to where I just had to know everything there was about it and all that kind of stuff. So, and that was 19. So that was 2012-ish. So yeah.
So you're 19. You immediately fall in love. You smoke this hash joint. What does the next 6 months look like? How quickly did you fall into it? I know because I follow you on Instagram that you're really a talented cultivator outside of the garden. When did cultivation start taking place?
Well, so the next 6 months after that, we had finished the skate park and we were not far from being done it then. And like right when I got back into town, it was like I hit up the one car guy that I knew he knew someone who, who had bud. And it was like, okay, link me with that guy. And I got linked with him. And then it was just like, yeah. And I just started consuming it. It was probably like 2 to 3 years of just consuming it after that point. So yeah, it wasn't until like 2014 that I actually tried to cultivate for real. I had like a garage that I was renting with a buddy, like for our cars. And I just had a super tiny like cabinet grow. It was like, 2 feet by 4 feet or something. I had to see a plant living, right? It was just, I hadn't seen it and I needed to be a part of it. So they were just like, they were successful grows, but they were just like these European genetics, like autos, like they'd be nothing now, but they were, I got to see a plant, growing then. So yeah, it was about 2 to 3 years of just consuming it. And then finally like had some seeds and had to pop them. So
that's awesome. So, I mean, talk to me about cultivation. Was it, did you apply the same sort of personality trait where you just kind of went down the rabbit hole with cultivation and got into it quickly, or was it a more gradual interest that picked up for you?
After the first like smaller one, it was just like find whatever nutrients like the local head shop or like grocery store had, right, that you could actually get in, that you weren't ordering stuff to your house, and that was, even in whatever 2013, 14. So I was just using whatever I could, and and then on the forums, like IC Mag was super big as far as just reading about, techniques and all this kind of stuff. And then it was like a year or so of growing with like general hydroponics, just like bottled nutrients. And then I stumbled, I don't know if it was IC Mag or Instagram, but on like Mountain Organics and these guys doing like this living soil, and it was super intriguing because that was like how my grandma grew, like her vegetables in her garden and stuff. So I had a sense that it worked, but it was just bringing it indoors was a whole new path. But I definitely went down like the rabbit hole for sure of like growing and techniques, and hours and hours and hours and hours on IC Mag, just reading grow diaries and everything. Yeah, just absorbing it all. I'm a sponge for that. So
that's really cool, man. I didn't know you were on the forums like that. So, I mean, after you read Mountain Organic, you connect with Mountain Organic Botanicals. They've got that unbelievable living soil recipe on their website. Did you emulate that and utilize their recipe, or did you transition more slowly into living soil? Like, what did that look like?
No, it was like with my partner at the time, I was just like, I think this is what we should do, and made a small little pitch, and it was like on board. So we kind of just like, I was already reusing my soil with like general hydroponics just because of the type of setup we had. We couldn't get a lot of soil in and then having to haul it out. So it was just like, we should just harvest the plant, like shake the soil off the roots and then kind of reuse it. Cause I was already using like a really low level of nutrients. So, and I was just reusing soil. So I had kind of an idea of that. So we kind of just dove right into just switching, how we fed the plant. So we just started amending the soil, and it was using the Mountain Organics mix, because that was pretty much the only thing that was out there. It was Mountain Organics, and then I think Clackamas Coot. They had recipes, and they were both pretty similar. And I mean, those are both based off of the Cornell mix from the university, where it's like a potting mix, basically, where it's 30% peat moss, 30% aeration, and then 30% like compost matter. So, and that's kind of what they're all based off of. And then the amendments that you add from there kind of can depend on what you have access to and then whose recipe you're following. I know people used to do, I think Subcool, because he had his kind of like living soil. Well, it wasn't called living soil; it was called super soil. Yeah.
And so yeah. How big were your plots when you first started you know, doing this? Like, I mean, I also have experience cultivating and living soil indoors. I know that there's a bit of a learning curve to it. You know, what were some of the trials and tribulations that you might have gone through in your first few years doing it?
Definitely a learning curve that you needed like bigger pots, for sure. Like we started out with small pots. I think we started out with like I actually used to veg in like big gulp cups because it was just they were like tall and narrow and they fit in like the space I had. It wasn't ideal, but it was either that or nothing. Um, so it was definitely like having to do bigger pot sizes, and I mean that was the biggest change. But I mean like everything was new from like amending the plant or like the soil and understanding how
Were
the
you
plant was growing in this type of setup, and there was lots of little changes, but above the soil it was all pretty much the same, like training the plants and filling up the space, and with like the lights and all that kind of stuff, there wasn't a whole lot of difference there. So it was a lot of just learning about the soil. So that's kind of where I like dove down into a rabbit hole of reading like the teaming with microbes books, and just listening to more I guess soil based content, stuff like that. So
Yeah, it's incredible how the plant pulls you to like be incredibly fascinated by topics that you never in a million years thought you would be. I mean, I find myself, you know, the same way reading, reading the same books. Um,
yeah,
and,
they,
and,
you know
never in a million years, if you told 18-year-old Jameson he was going to be fascinated with soil biology, that he would believe you. And so it's just so cool where this plant takes you. I know now, I see you're working out of large totes. Was that gradual evolution, just because it's a workable size for you, or is there something about the tote that you enjoy working with? What is it about those totes that you like as planters?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was like a mix of things. I saw it on someone else's story like many years ago, and I was like, that's a really good idea because like it's stackable. Like if I needed to put them away, I could just put the lid on them and I can stack them and stuff like that. And it was like it fit the space really well. They were affordable, and yeah, they had just been working and they were like super cheap. So, and I'm kind of like, if it still works and I don't really have a reason to switch, from it. I think a lot of times people can get, and like me included, you can get caught up in trying to have the next thing, and adding too many variables into your situation could just throw too many curveballs and you can't handle them all. So just kind of keeping things that work, the same, or keeping things that work well the same, seems to make sense for me. So there wasn't a whole lot of, reasoning behind it other than like I saw it, I wanted to try it, and then it worked after I tried it. So
And I know that you're a proponent of blue mats, but I think I also watched you when you don't have your blue mats hooked up, you're watering with the lid on and then using the uh, grooves that are preset in the lid to disperse the water evenly over the top of your soil. Am I right?
I don't know, like some kind of like something on top of the
It,
soil that I'm
it
watering
might,
it into.
yeah, I might have been somebody else that I saw it on, but I remember
Okay.
somebody doing some type of watering technique where they drilled a couple holes in that lid. But we can. I want to. I want to.
Okay.
I want to ask you about blue mats, though. I mean, at what point?
Okay.
At what point did you start playing with them?
That was pretty early on. I mean, it was a few years after Living Soil. It was once I, yeah, kind of had Living Soil, then I had a space where I could have a reservoir. I think I kind of knew about them. I'm trying to think of where I knew about them. I'm pretty sure there was these guys on YouTube, like Minnesota Nice, like many years ago, and they had like their indoor setup, and I'm pretty sure they were using blue mats. But they've been around since like the 60s or 70s, like the blue mats. It's crazy how long they've been around for. So once because lots of living soil guys were talking about it because you don't want any dry back with living soil. So keeping the soil, evenly moist all the time is super crucial. And these blue mats seem to be what most guys were using and how it worked. So it's probably like at least 6 years now of using blue mats. And like, there's definitely been ups and downs, but there's been way more ups, to where I definitely use them wherever I can, for sure.
So, I mean, you noticed an immediate improvement in your overall health of your soil and plants. Is that when you first started using them?
Yeah, once you get them dialed in and they keep like the top of the soil, evenly, moist, so like the bacteria and all the microbes and everything can just really do lots of work, because that's where it does lots of work within like the top, 4 to 6 inches of soil. And usually, traditionally, that can be the driest, depending on your watering system that you're using. So I definitely noticed um, healthier plants, just more consistent growth, because every time that it gets too dry, like you're killing off roots, and then the plant has to kind of regrow them. And then if you overwater, it's kind of the same thing as underwatering, where it kills some of the roots and it has to build back. So at least in this type of setup, the plant really likes the consistency, and that's definitely what the blue mats brought. And that was, yeah, I saw that and I was like, yeah, this has got to be on every plant, that I can. So
100%. As somebody who has a ton of experience with blue mats, like what advice do you give to individuals who are new to using them? Like, what are some of the mistakes that you've made and subsequently learned to correct?
that's a good question too, because there's definitely been like, I think with most watering systems, like someone's at least had a flood once, with them. But definitely like read lots of little tips and tricks on them, because there's quite a few, but like the biggest ones are making sure that you're setting them up properly, because if they're not set up properly, then it doesn't matter how much you pay attention or how much you dial in, they're not going to work as they should. It seems simple, but there's some things that really need to be set up properly, and these are one of them. And then like not bumping the little sensors once they're in the soil, because they really rely on that contact between the soil. Um, it's just a tensiometer, so it's just measuring the tension in the water. So any like air gaps between the sensor and the soil can cause issues. Um, and then making sure that like your reservoir, if you're using one, is high enough and has enough pressure to flow throughout your whole setup. I know for lots of big rooms, guys will have pressure, and like pressure definitely can alleviate a lot of the problems that a reservoir can bring, because it requires, to be topped up all the time and stuff like that. But it's nice because there's no pumps and there's no power. So if you lose power or whatever, it's not going to draw any extra power if you're tight on power. So that's what's cool about them. But yeah, definitely just paying attention to setting them up and the little tips and tricks, and really paying attention within the first few weeks of after installing them, because that's, if there's any issues that are going to come up, it's going to be in like a few days probably after you set it up. So
when you're setting your carrots up, do you follow the instructions and turn the one triangle over after the hanging drip, or do you just leave it? Because I've found when I turn that one triangle over, it's too much sometimes for me, and maybe I just have fat fingers.
Right.
Do you
Like,
do you follow the instructions and do the like extra turn after you've had the drip hanging when you're setting the emitters?
yeah, I'm trying to think, because I definitely know, like, so when you turn it one more, you're saying that's too dry then
Yeah, like what
for
they
you?
say. Yeah,
Okay.
they're saying in the setup, and like I've talked to a couple other friends of mine, and they've had similar experiences. But I know blue mats really well. Is that when you're setting them up, you go to where the drip is hanging, and then you turn one more notch, one more triangle
Yeah.
air over. And in my experience, I tend to end up going back to those carrots and turning them almost fully one more triangle back.
Okay.
Not just, is that something, it might just be unique to me. Is that something that you've experienced?
That's not something I've experienced, because actually there's another podcast, to Keep It Simple,
Yeah.
like Kiss Organics podcast, and on
Yeah.
there, the one guy who has a facility, he was talking about setting them up, and I think I set it up how he does, to where I saturate the medium to where I like to max saturation that I would ever have it at, and then I put the carrots in, and then I kind of use like the water and kind of water around the carrot to make sure like this, like the soil is like touching like the carrot or the sensor, and then when I open like the carrot up. So that's another good tip, is to make sure that your system is bled of like any air, because any air, it's like a brake system, like any air in it, it's going to throw everything off. So like having a purge, so if you don't set up like an extra valve in your line like they suggest, you can just use your furthest carrot from your reservoir and open that up all the way and let the stream of water come out, and until it's a constant stream and there's no like spitting or any air coming out, and then they're all ready to be set up. And so then after I get that drip, I'm pretty sure I turn it back three triangles to the right, and then I usually go from there. So then I monitor it from there, and that's how I set it up, based on like what I do before that, and like depending on how wet your soil is, or how much contact there is between the soil and the carrot, or how strong your pressure is in your line, is going to change how tight you have to do the carrot, because on my reservoir system, it is different than my pressure system. I would say that my pressure system, I probably don't have to turn it. I can't think now, but they are different. I have to turn
Yeah.
one down more than the other.
Are you
So there are variables. So
yeah. Are you measuring your soil moisture, or are you going by feel? Like, are you at 110, or where are you?
I used to, I do have one of the blue mat sensors, and I used to use it, but then it was kind of getting, I still want to use it. I want to get more, but it was kind of getting a little inaccurate, or I was maybe paying attention to the numbers too much, to where like, even when you're using the sensor, a good practice is, if you're told to get it to like 80 M bars or whatever, have it read 80 M bars, but then put your hand in the soil and feel what 80 M bar feels like in your hands, right? So then you can go to the next bed and the next bed, and you can kind of feel, oh no, this is wetter, than 80. Oh no, this is drier than that, right? So then you kind of have kind of like a feel to go with those numbers. So that can be really helpful. And that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm kind of like, the plant's super happy here and they're all the same. So it's definitely like a science and art thing, like a lot of growing and hash making and a lot of this stuff, right? It's kind of like, if you pay attention too much to the numbers, you can lose too much of the art. But if you're not paying any attention to the numbers, you might be, missing out on some crucial details and, stuff like that. So
you mentioned not disturbing your carrots once you put them in. Are you putting sort of more fine material or media around the carrot? Like, I know some guys that have a lot of like pumice stones or vermiculite or things like that for drainage. Those too close to your carrot and will just throw things really off. So like, are you preventing against that, or are you just leaving those things out of your soil? Like, how do you?
If you have chunks in your soil like that, then it's definitely smart to do what they're doing by putting like a layer of compost or peat moss or something of a consistent, size. In my soil, it's not usually much of an issue. I don't really have too big of chunks of stuff. But then if I do, I'd probably just like remove it out with my hand or whatever. And then I kind of like try to pack the carrot in. So so it's tight. Like that's a big thing. Like, if your soil's not wet enough and you kind of just put the carrot in, that can all throw it off for sure. So making sure that there's good contact is definitely crucial.
I want to talk about cover crop. I've noticed that you use a lot of cardboard, and I think that that's super interesting, because I've had, struggles with different cover crops. And so I just wanted to, is that by design, or is that temporary and transitioning to something else, or have you landed on cardboard and enjoy what it does?
That's just one of those like test, sort of things, right? Because you see guys with like their worm bins and they'll, have a cardboard on top because it's good, fibrous material for the worms, and it's a source of carbon. So, but there wasn't. It was like I I didn't want to use straw at that point or on those particular pots or whatever it was. So it was like, hey, I'm going to use cardboard. But yeah, that one run I used cardboard just as a way to obviously block the light from the soil, and that's to me like the biggest benefit that like cover crop or just a mulch in general will provide. um, I haven't done like a living mulch or like a cover crop or a companion crop um, in a while because it ends up becoming another um, plant that you have to manage. So it might not be large, but it is consuming some of the nutrients in your soil. It is going to attract potentially different pests, or when you're scoping for pests, as you should be as part of your IPM, you have to scope your cover crop as well because they got little leaves. So, and like clover is good for like attracting little mites and stuff, and then they might make their way up to your plants and stuff like that. Or people can use them as like I can't think of the word, but if you see them on there, then you can kind of bring in beneficials and stuff before they get to like your cash crop, right? So
Yes,
they'll kind
capture.
of
Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
they can help that way. But I've kind of stayed away from living. I really enjoyed straw, and just putting a thick layer of straw down. It allows like the soil to stay kind of cool at the top and moist all the way to the top, to where like the worms, anyone who's seen my stories and stuff, like worms are crawling all the way to the top and it's super active, and like the cover or like the straw is a big reason for that, because it's blocking out the light, keeping it cool, and like keeping it moist. So that's kind of what that's all about for me. So whether it's the cardboard or straw, or like you have a thick, grass or like living mulch layer, like whatever it is, it's keeping that top layer, alive and more active. So it's cycling more nutrients and all that good stuff.
Have you played with rice hulls at all? Any thoughts on that as a cover crop?
I haven't. I've seen people do it, and like I think for most people it's probably like uh sourcing it might be an issue, and then I can't remember if it's more expensive or not, but I'm pretty sure it's like pure silica. So even if it gets mixed in with your soil, it's an organic source of silica. So I can't see why there would be any issues with it, but I have no direct experience with it.
Before we move on from fertigation, or irrigation, I want to talk about uh, the drip tape from Blue Mat. You have experience with both the emitters and the drip tape, and I see you using a lot of drip tape. What's your
Yeah.
experience, and why do you prefer one over the other?
I actually had like huge issues with the drip tape in the beginning. I was sent like a bunch of faulty ones, and it just flooded my shit out, and I was just like, oh man, I don't know if I want to use these. But they sent out replacements, and I just heard really good things about them, and I was determined to make it work. But like the big thing is that you can use a lot less carrots per bed, where uh like the Socos can manage a lot more area. Like I just have two sensors in like 4x8 beds that run like 3 or 4 blue soak lines. So, and then them not getting like gummed up. So with the drippers, when they're on the soil, like the soil life and everything is drawn towards like the water source. So eventually it just gets like kind of gummed up with organic matter and kind of, you know, and it can kind of affect how they work. Not always, sometimes like the water drips right through it, but it was kind of just like an ease of use thing with the soak tape, and that was actually brought in not by Blue Mats, but by like the American distributor of Blue Mats. I can't think of their name, but they're out of Colorado. But they're the ones who invented it and brought it, and it was a really good idea because like I love it for outdoor, like my outdoor gardens as well. So
Is it Sustainable Village?
Sustainable Village, yes, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see you use it all on your outdoor in your garden for your vegetables as well. I think that's really cool. I wanted to ask you about your lighting. Have you always been an LED cultivator, or were you an early adopter, or where do you fall there?
I felt like I was like the last person to get LEDs because I was just I saw them changing so much, and just like it felt like every few months they were just coming out with new ones and new ones, and I was like, well, I'm just gonna keep using these HIDs. Like it's annoying having to change the bulbs, and like they put off a lot of heat and stuff like that. And it wasn't because I didn't see people, grow successfully with them. Like I saw like Canarus and like Freeze and Extracts and like a few other people who were having like wicked, harvests with them. So I was just trying to wait it out. I was trying to wait it out till I saw ones that kind of made sense. And then once I saw like the ones that have like super wide coverage, basically like the bar style now, or like the cob style, you know, instead of like the single fixture that's meant to cover a wide area, I was kind of like, okay, these ones make sense. So, but I wasn't ready to like buy super expensive ones. So I bought like one or two off of Amazon, and they just worked really well. So I just got a few more, and so I wasn't always an LED person. I knew I was going to switch. It was like before I smoked weed. Like I knew I was going to smoke weed. It was just a matter of kind of when. So yeah, there wasn't any rhyme or reason to it, but I wasn't an early adopter, but I was around them. So it was super cool to see kind of like the progression of them, like up close and stuff. So
Very cool. And now you're just running still like Amazon LEDs, or have you switched over to a specific brand?
now I'm still just using the Amazon one. So I mean, it works.
That's awesome. Talk to me about the cultivars that are in your garden. Like, in fact, let's go back and go. What were some of the first cultivars that you remember growing? Like, I know we talked about those autos and things like that, but what about after that?
Yeah, actually, I remember one of the autos. It was the Ogre, and I don't know what cross, but it was called the Ogre. It was like a freebie with something else that I had. But it wasn't till like my first trip out to Vancouver in 2015 for the Great Canadian Glass Gathering, which was one of my first kind of like culture type events, my first time being on the coast and stuff like that. But there was like sponsors and like people there, and they were, there were samples and stuff like that. So some of the first seeds that I got were from Medman, and they were these PTSD. It was Purple Tie, Sour Diesel, and we had a few other crosses from him. Like he had his own version of a Kush, I think, like that. If I can remember that right. But and then I kind of got a few more seeds. We found this site, Hemp Depot. They were like in Toronto or something, and like 2013, I think. I like we still had to like fill out the form like by hand and like put cash in the envelope and send it. But there was this guy called Bean Hoarder, and he just had like hundreds of seeds for like super cheap. So some of the first ones I grew were some of the crosses from him. So there was like a Black Widow, a Blockhead. Um, I don't think I think maybe we popped the PTSD as well. And they were all, I mean, they were all really good. And that's on that Hemp Depot was also where I saw Chimera, and that's where I bought the seeds that I have, or that led me to the genetics that I have now, like the blueberry crosses and stuff from him. But they were just on that site, so it was just a matter of Like they had them, and I bought. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I wasn't, I was just looking for good cheap seeds. Like I was new to it all. Like I didn't want to spend a bunch of money and then not have them pop or something like that. So it was just kind of an attractive deal. So those were some of the first ones that I remember growing. So even like the sweet blue and a blueberry grapefruit and like Dolce Sativa. Some of those would be the earlier ones. I grew
Did you
a brand.
when you were growing those in those early days, were you aware of the concept of holding mothers back, and or were there things that you saw that you wish you could have, saved a copy of that you hadn't quite gotten to that point in your cultivation yet? Like, I know I have some things that I didn't understand cloning, and I didn't understand mothers, and if my memory serves me correct, it would have been nice to have, a copy of one or two of the things that I saw. So, did any of that happen for you when you were going through those packs?
Well, because I was so like invested in like the forum and stuff like that, like
Yeah,
through enough grow diaries, I had seen people, mothers and clones and stuff like that. So I had consumed a lot of that information as well. So I think even very early on, like once I popped some of these like genetics I was talking about, like from Bean Hoarder and stuff, I'm pretty sure I had cloning and like the mother stuff not down, but I was able to do it to where like, because I've had the sweet blue for like 6 years now, so it was one of those ones that I had way back then, and like obviously I'm glad I had it figured out. There's obviously a few that I've had over the years that I've lost, even though I knew like how to clone and stuff like that, which obviously happens still. But I'm pretty sure I had a pretty good understanding of all that early on, just from how much I consumed from the forums. So
that's awesome. So was the blueberry cross from I'm forgetting his name.
from Chimera.
Chimera, thank you.
Yeah.
Was that one of the first plants that really jumped out at you as a pheno hunter, or were there many plants before that?
There was a few of the bean hoarders, like one of the Black Widows I called it Black Lemon, I think. I can't remember what, but that one came out really nice. But yeah, it wasn't really till I popped the Chimera that it was like, oh man, like genetics play like a way bigger role than I kind of thought, as far as like, because I didn't change anything. The lights are the same, the grow is the same, everything is the same, and like the plants are coming out like way frostier and just way smellier and stuff like that. So that's when it was kind of like, okay. And then I'm pretty sure I made another order with Hemp Depot and bought like everything else they had at Chimera, because it was like, okay, if this is good, then they're all going to be good. So the sweet blue and blueberry grapefruit were definitely ones that stood out. I do remember the PTSD from Medman, still to this day, being the most diesely or kerosene type plant that I've ever had. That was I was right at the time of like flower rosin. So we were like squishing the nugs, and it was coming out so oily on the parchment paper that even in the freezer you couldn't collect it. It was just sap, but it was so foul to smoke that like I would have kept it because of how strong it was, but it literally tasted like you were just drinking a bottle of like kerosene, or it was crazy. And the only reason we didn't keep it was because it just hermied bad. Like it would just throw like male flowers like on the lower parts, and like no other plant was doing it. So okay, well we can't keep this around. So I probably have seeds of it or something, but I just didn't want to pop them because I knew it was unstable. But yeah, those were some of the earliest plants that I was like, okay, yeah, this is, there's something to this. And that's where, yeah, I kept them, and I think I hashed the sweet blue shortly after that, like within a year maybe of finding it.
So how did you find out about flower rosin? On the forums, like through
I mean that was all. So we're on like or this is on like Bubble Man's page, and that's where like I was like watching every single hash church, in the beginning. So that was kind of like obviously social media was around, but someplace like hash church or maybe a few other places, but mainly hash church were putting it all together as far as like one place to kind of consume, the newest stuff. So it was definitely on hash church that probably most likely on hash church is where I learned about like the flower rosin, like when soil grown came on. So
That's fire. Shout out to Marcus for everything he's done, for letting us put this on his platform, and everything he continues to do, man. That guy earned his flowers. So
yeah, and his page was where I learned how to make bubble hash as well, right? I mean, so because it was one of the only places that was putting out just like like people doing it. I mean, there was no labs really doing it at the time, so it was cool to see someone just in a backyard or in the middle of winter, just exactly how I would do it, you know, doing it and making really, really good quality stuff. So it was like, yeah, all that early stuff came from like Bubble Man's page, maybe like some old Nicotine videos, and I think maybe a few Matt Rise videos. But yeah, it was mostly like the Bubble Man videos that were like, oh, this is the thing that you can do, so.
yeah. Your first wash, it was cured material?
Yeah, so at this point I had linked up with like this OG homie now, and he just always had the best flower around, and it was after that trip to Van that I'm pretty sure we got to try like West Coast. I'm pretty sure at one of the concentrate cups in Vancouver that summer, they had like West Coast Collective, and they had some solventless. Um, that's like what Melt Season was making, like when he was a part of them then, and it was just like, okay, like you can make this type of stuff. So when I came back, I was kind of like determined to make, to make hash. But like my buddy was like, okay, well you can play with all these smalls, right? Like just gave me the bottoms of all these packs. He's like, you're not gonna make what you think you're gonna make, right? Like, and because he knew it came from, like, I was pretty naive then, but I was very like determined, and sure enough, like I made some decent pipe hash or whatever, but it wasn't like mouth, and it wasn't terpy, and it wasn't whatever, and it was bottoms, and that was kind of around the time of finding like the sweet blue and stuff like that. So it was like, wash something good. It was kind of like the genetics, learning that the genetics was a big part of the quality of the flower, learning that, the flower was a big part of the quality of the resin. So.
And so when did it come to that point when you had that congratulatory summit moment where you made something that was melty and was terpy?
I think that was like, I'm pretty sure, yeah, my first washes were in like 2016. I had bought a 1 gallon bubble bag set. I'm pretty sure I bought it in Vancouver at like Fresh Headies, like at their store, like, so that was pretty cool. But I bought like the 1 gallon bags, and yeah, I did a little wash. I think like it was sweet blue, it was fresh frozen in a 1 gallon. I don't know if I had to think how much I washed. It was probably like, I don't know, like under 100 grams, right? Just like whipping up a little like 1 gallon in my sink. But man, that came out so fire. And because I had been watching so much like the CCC 420, they were like a YouTube channel like over the years, and they were the ones that introduced. They're in Cali, so they showed you all the melt and stuff like that, what guys could do, and they were dabbing melt, way back then. And so I was like, well, mine looks dabbable. So I like dabbed the sweet blue, and like it, melted away to nothing almost. So I was just like, oh shit, like I think I have a little something here. So it wasn't my first wash, but I think it was like the first fresh frozen wash, one of the first washes that I did from my flower, because I think prior to that, I think I blasted some of the Sweet Blue with like some BHO on like a friend's, balcony or whatever. And that came out super fire, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I knew I did not want to play with BHO anymore. Like that was like, I was one and done. I just did not like the process. At least with open blasting and stuff, it was a lot different. But with like the hash, it felt safer. And yeah, it came out super fire. And I was like, oh, this, I'm onto something. I need to grow more of the Sweet Blue, basically, is what I thought. So, yeah.
Did you, like, because you were on the forum so much and you were such a researcher, did you have to learn that hard lesson that most hash makers have to learn on a really horrible yield, as far as, treg structure and the tackiness of the gland itself? Or was that something that you knew to look for from being on the forums?
Well, yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of, it was more cultivation on the forums. All the hash knowledge and stuff like that did come from that CCC 420 channel. Just basically paying attention to like the Cali culture, where these guys had access to the outdoor mount and all that kind of stuff. So I knew what you could make. And then when it happened, like almost one of my first tries, it was the opposite experience, right? To where it came out super well the first time, that it pretty much only went down from there, because Sweet Blue is still my best washer, So it's one of those things where the best washer I have, I got it. It was like my first wash. So, but I did have like the blueberry grapefruit. I learned washing that one that it was way different resin, and like it was way stickier to scoop out of the bags, even at the same temperature, like even if it was cold. And then I learned, what I kind of already knew, but not all resin glands are the same. So like Sweet Blue squishes like, 80-85% into rosin, whereas like the same amount of blueberry grapefruit squish like 65% into rosin. So I was like, these heads have more wax membranes and less terpenes and cannabinoids inside of them and all that kind of stuff. So washing all the other stuff I had, I got to learn about all this kind of stuff. But like my first wash was like, yeah, like it couldn't have gone any better.
So, I mean, was it a constant battle, sort of trying to chase that first experience? Like how many cycles till you felt like you managed to get a handle on the parameters and, understand how to replicate that process?
Of like washing or of growing?
Well, like with the Sweet Blue, like was it did you have to wait for more input material for you to cultivate it, or were you outsourcing other material as you were starting to wash, just to sort of learn and for practice?
No, I was pretty much limited to what I was bringing to the table.
Yeah.
So it was like
How many
it was
times,
like this is
how many
yeah, it was like this is what I have, and it was, I mean, I pretty much wanted to fill the room up with like Sweet Blue right at that point, and just be like this again, like just like the same thing with the totes or the cardboard or whatever. It's like it worked, and it was something that like you couldn't really get elsewhere. So I was just like, I'm gonna keep doing this. It was a lot of it was space. Like I didn't have a lot of space. Like this was all like I was flowering in a 4x4 tent, and I had a little like, I don't know, like 2 foot tall by like 6 feet wide little thing on a shelf that I was vegging in. Like it was very like, even if I wanted to, chase more strains or find more stuff that made hash, it just didn't make sense because I already had something and I didn't have a lot of room. So I was very limited with like resources at that, at that time.
For sure. So at what point did you bring the GMO into the garden?
I was gifted that GMO. I don't know when that would have been. Probably around, I don't know, 2019 or so. So yeah, that's like it came to me and it was like, yeah, this is like the Skunk Master Flex cut, I think is what it is, and like you can cultivate it and, like do your thing with it. So it was like, let's see what it's about. One that I had heard. I'd very much enjoyed like the Chem cookies from Heavenly Days when I had it. And I was like, yeah, this is supposed to be something similar. So then, yeah, like having it and growing it was like, it's a crazy plant for sure. I know that's one of your favorites for sure.
I'm a big fan of GMO. When done right, it is a special plant. Are there currently any other plants other than Sweet Blue and GMO in your stable, or?
So I have Sweet Blue, GMO, Fruity Pebble OG, Lemon Meringue, and my Sour Amnesia. And yeah, most of those I've had, I got the GMO and the Fruity Pebble at the same time, but the Sweet Blue, Lemon Meringue, and Sour Amnesia have pretty much all grown up together, over the last 5-6 years. Because yeah, they all got kind of brought into the garden around similar times. First Sweet Blue, then Lemon Meringue, and then Sour Amnesia. So yeah, it's still like a space thing. They were all what, sir?
They were your selections?
Well, yeah, I mean, they were like the Sweet Blue was like, this is what it is. Like I didn't pop a pack and search for it. It was just like, it was just a mixed pack of seeds from Chimera, and then that was in it. And then same with the blueberry grapefruit. It was like I had 2 phenos of the blueberry grapefruit, but they were identical. So it was just like I just picked one, and then the Sour Amnesia was a bag seed, and I just had one seed in the bag. So I have like I haven't really done, like, again, space. I didn't really have a lot of room to do pheno hunts. So the fact that I was blessed with such quality plants from such few amounts of seed pop. Now, obviously, I popped a lot of seeds, in the past, but I still got pretty good genetics from those ones as well. So I just didn't keep them. So
I want to ask you about fresh press versus cured resin. I know that it's not as a hotly debated topic here in Canada as it is in the US, but being a maker, you have access to fresh press. What are your experiences and observations dabbing your cultivars fresh press versus cured?
I'm curious on what the big debate is in the States on it then. Can you expand on that?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's a number of individuals who feel that the best representation of the plant is when it's served to them as fresh press, and then whether they want to consume it as fresh press or then let it cure out as a single or double gram and maybe consume it marbled or whip it themselves, versus in Canada, we've seen a lot of cold cure, which is just more or less the standard, but starting to see a little bit of fresh press in the market. And I wanted to know if that was something that you've experienced at all, like as far as Sweet Blue or the GMO or any of those other cultivars on fresh press or as fresh press via like as a dab, versus when that same product is cured out, and what do you prefer? What have you observed from one to the other?
I think fresh press is really hard just because, like you said, I mean, it's called fresh press. I mean, at what point is it not fresh anymore, right? Like if someone's like, here's some freshly squeezed orange juice, but they got it, yesterday morning and or something, is it still fresh? So it's like where you would determine, where you would draw the line for fresh, because I think most fresh press is only going to be consumed by like the grower or his close friends, people who are getting it that day. Yeah. And because so go ahead.
I was just gonna say, my good friend MTS Farms, he says this very similar thing, and he refers to it as non-nucleated. He said we shouldn't call it fresh press if it's more than 3 hours old. After 3 hours, it's just non-nucleated hash or non-nucleated rosin. But right. I mean, agree with him, but still to that point, there are individuals who there are hash makers who only they hunt for fresh press varietals that do well in fresh press, and they've never cold cured out anything for their consuming public. Like, I think that it's an interesting topic where, there's Canadian consumers who are going, what are you talking about fresh press? Of course I'd cold cure everything. And then there's guys in other markets who go, I don't know what cold curing is. I put out everything as fresh press.
Right. And yeah, I think I think some things can get lost in like the lingo or like the terminology, because I think, at least here, when I think of fresh press, I think of it as a consistency and not so much as this was freshly squeezed, 3 hours ago. As far as like it being like that sap, like here, like the most common fresh press being from like Van Span, to where, it's still like that clear sap, and
Yeah.
I don't know for sure, but I think a lot of the times the way that he does it, it gets to the consumer like that. So like how, like, if it gets to the consumer how the hash maker intends it, then I think, that's a viable option, right? I think a big reason why people do cold cure is because it's going to get to you the same consistency that it left me.
Yeah.
But also, kind of like we're talking, like if you get it 2 days later after it's fresh press, it's kind of like pre-cured rosin then, because
Yeah.
it's going to get to that state, and then it's going to stabilize there, which is, that stabilization is generally what you're talking about when you say something is cured, right? Like with flour, it's stabilized at that point, like everything is equal, the moisture levels are equal, everything is broken down appropriately, it's reached a point of where it's stabilizing. That's the same thing with the rosin. But I don't know, maybe people in the States, with fresh press, maybe a certain varietals, it's able to, stay that consistency and keep those terpenes in it. But generally, just like with growing, like the fresh plant is going to smell slightly different than the dried flower of it, because you're going to be evaporating a few of those, terpenes, like those volatile terpenes. And I think that's going to happen with rosin as well, if they didn't get lost on, on the press, while being made. So I don't have a lot of experience with fresh press, other than like what's left on the dabber after I'm making rosin, and then I like dab that, but everything else pretty much goes in the jar, and it's for nothing more than a consistency thing, because I want the patient to get it in the consistency that I make it in, and it's something that's stable.
Mhm.
I've had, like the cold cure rosin sit in the jar out at room temperature for a year, and it'd be the same consistency, maybe a tad drier, but it's still like, it's still a buttery, creamy, like it's terpy, it's wet still, and it holds that consistency. So that's what it's about for me. So it's more about, the consistency and getting it to the, like the patient or the consumer how you want it to. I think when you do something like fresh press, and if maybe you don't have the process down, the consumer is going to get it in a different form, than you intended. And then, it's hard to create a consistent product across all consumers or patients that way, I think. But I don't have a preference to one way or another. If it's terpy and I can get it on my dabber or in the banger, right? Like, that's what it's about, right? So
I want to ask you your preference on melt versus rosin. Do you lean one way or the other?
melt definitely hits different. Like, there's something about unadulterated, resin heads, ones that have never seen heat and only seen room temperature. When a choice, almost always lean towards melt. But it's kind of like with cultivars, when you get into rosin or when you get into solventless, like you're narrowing your selection of like terpenes because of how much stuff washes. And then when you get into melt, you're even narrowing it even further to what makes quality melt. So if you only consume melt, you're probably going to be consuming, not the maybe the most wide variety of terpenes, but maybe you only like, that select amount of terpenes, so then you really luck out. So, melt is like it's like the pinnacle for, in my opinion, and in lots of other hash makers' opinion. It's a mix of like the cultivar has to be able to make full amount before the hasher can produce it, so, and not all cultivars done that, so, but I definitely prefer melt. But yeah, you're missing out on a lot of terps if you're only going to smoke melt. Like, there's so much fire rosin out there, right? There's so much fire BHO, out there. There's lots of good cannabis products out there. So
absolutely, no, I completely agree. Do you have a lot of experience, or what are your thoughts on air dried melt versus freeze dried melt?
I don't really have, I don't think about it a whole lot. I mean, I think when done properly, both make a really good consumer product. I do think that with air dried, well, for one, it looks cooler, like it looks like caviar, like like in the jar, and I think to some degree it'll be more stable, at room temperature as melt. But I think for like a lot of production, or when you're running a lot of volume for a lot of people, it's not as feasible. It takes up a lot more room. It's still an option for sure, but yeah, I don't have a lot of thoughts about it. I definitely smoked proper and fire air dried and like freeze dried hash, and I've smoked less than stellar, freeze dried and air dried hash, right? So
for sure. We're seeing a big rise in popularity of resin mixing and blending, either pre-wash as loose resin or as rosins. Is that something that you've played around with and have any experience with?
not really, not since like, I mean, if you get ninja dabbed or something, right, and someone like sneaks in another terp on you,
Yeah.
and then I've had a few of those be like, "Whoa, what was that? Like, what did you put in, or what did you put in?" Right? Because it's like, so I don't know. I think mixing flavors is probably as old as mankind. So I think it's natural to want to do it. I think I lean a little more towards like the purist side of it, where I'm just like, I prefer to enjoy it as as they are, but there's no real reason behind it other than like, wanting to not just be in the middle and to kind of wanting to lean towards the side. So I think I lean more towards the pure side, because I don't really mix flavors, even with cannabis. Like, I'm not one to mix two different flowers together, in the same joint or something like that. I'm not even like, I smoke hash and rosin in joints, but I even prefer just to smoke just straight flower, or just one kind. Or if I am mixing, I like to put the same strain of hash in with the flower in a joint. So yeah, nothing bad about mixing resin. I don't have a whole lot of opinion on it. Yeah, I think you can come up with some great mixes that way, and I think it might be like a way to kind of cheat with breeding, maybe, if you kind of wanted to see what two plants mixed together would give you. You can smoke there too, and you can kind of smoke variations of it. It doesn't always have to be like a 0.5 of one and a 0.5 of another. What if you cross those seeds and you get a 90-10? So how about put a 0.9 of the one and a 0.1 of the other together, and do all 10 variations of that, and then see what comes up, and see if you want to cross those two together. That's where my mind goes with that question, just like the growing and like the breeding, because that would be like, probably that would be one of the reasons why I would probably mix the resins more than anything, if I were to. So
just kind of like R&D. That makes sense. I wanted to ask you, like, as a smoker, are you purely committed to consuming organically cultivated material, or are you still open to consuming salt grown material?
Very open. Yeah, I definitely don't have a preference. I'm pretty much I fall into like if it's done proper, like I'll consume it, and just like with the mount or rosin, like I was saying, I've seen it done properly and improperly on like both sides. So I definitely there's a lot of quality salt grown stuff, and a lot of these salt guys are playing with microbes. They are playing, with fulvic acid, stuff like that. So it's not like the days of old where like, oh, it's just rock hard, terpless nug that you get from salt or something like that. It's like, like it can be super proper. And, there's lots of just good flour out there. And like lots of times, yeah, it's not one of my first questions. Like I usually don't go like, how is it grown? I usually say like, how does it smoke? Right? Like, how's the terps in it? Right? Like if it's got terps and and the smoke's good, I probably want to consume it. So
Do you feel as though typically organically cultivated flour produces a better effect, or there's some in the industry that say there's a more deeper multi-dimensional flavor produced when you've got biology present versus salts? Is that something that you've come across, or would you say not in your experience?
so in my personal experience, I don't think I do see a good amount of flour, but I don't think I see enough flour, especially, I haven't been to California and stuff like that, so I haven't been able to smoke all these varieties. I think a cool way would be to smoke the same varieties grown different ways. But like I think based on my knowledge and stuff, if both were like 10 out of 10, I think people would lean towards like the soil just because it probably, or like the living soil, because it probably will have more terpenes and be more of an expressed version of itself. Um, but very rarely do you see, like perfection on like both sides. But yeah, I think if both were done super, super well, I think people would lean towards like if they're drawn towards cannabis because of the terpenes and stuff like that, I think they'll lean towards the soil grown. But sometimes it doesn't make it look as nice, or it's not really my experience, just what people say. Like the bud structures might not look quite the same, but it's just because they're more expressive. I think with the living soils, like you know, I always use like the analogy of living soils, is kind of like a buffet, where the plant can kind of eat what it wants when it wants in the soil. Whereas in like a bottle grown setup, you're kind of like making it eat, what you want it to eat. But a lot of the time that, it's not like as bad as it sounds, right? Like, cause what the plant wants. Like, lots of these nutrient companies are pretty dialed into what most of these cultivars want. So like it's like the plant's, very happy with that type of setup too. But I think just like the different ways that the plant accesses the nutrients and the way that it's interacting with its environment just adds a different layer to the living soil perhaps. But yeah, I'm definitely not I'm not a snob towards like living soil by any means. Like I probably consume more salt grown than like living soil if I'm being honest. So
Do you judge quality by ash consistency and color?
um not you I mean, it's not the first thought, but when you're smoking something and you're like, oh wow, that tastes good. Oh, that's a thick, smooth smoke. And then like, you're like tasting it and then you look down and you go, oh cool, it has a white ash too, right? Like usually like the white ash goes along with all those other qualities, right? Like when it tastes how it smells in the bag, and it lights up really easy, and it's a good, smooth, thick smoke. So you can tell it's, got a high resin content. Like usually a white ash follows. So at least in my experience, and from being a cultivator, when you have stuff that, you know, everything else being equal and it doesn't burn as nice, it, you know, it doesn't have as much flavor, and, you know, it's not going to be as smooth and stuff like that. So sometimes a darker ash, while it can still be really good because the cultivar is just that good, it's probably not going to be as good as it would have been if it was, you know, everything was done proper. That kind of gave it the white ash, because I think that's kind of like the cherry on top. But it's not, yeah, it's not something I think about first. But most of the quality cannabis that, you know, I or most people consume, it's going to come with a white ash.
Word. I want to talk a little bit about your washing methodology. Are you you're hand washing? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you using bags or are you washing naked?
A little bit of both. So like the first wash will be like without a wash bag, and then like for the second and third and consecutive runs, if there is to be them, it'll be like in the bag. So there's not really a rhyme or reason, but yeah. So I do both.
But you're not using the cubes. You're not using the enclosed cubes.
No. I tried one of those like years ago, and like I was probably doing it wrong, and I think I did it in like a bubble washer machine too, but like it just did not turn out very well. I did not like it. So yeah, I like when like the bud and like the ice is just swirling around in the water together. Yeah.
Are you in your mind, are you envisioning the separation of the gland taking place like when you're changing directions in your paddling, or do you feel as though, you know, moving the water in a singular direction and creating a vortex is what creates that separation?
I think both, probably depending on like the starting material. I like something like the sweet blue. I think if it sat in the water long enough, all the heads would just fall off. Like I think some plants are just like that. Like if it's cold and like, you know, they're just ready to fall off at any point. You just, you know, maybe shake it a little bit and then it'll fall off. But yeah, like I think both. I think if you have maybe some bigger nugs, like maybe, you know, you didn't, like maybe it's not your material or something like that, and like I think kind of uh like the changing of directions, as you were saying, I think that can help kind of, you know, maybe get into the buds or something like that. But I don't really think it matters a whole lot if the trichomes are, you know, kind of that brittle, like hash making, you know, cultivar. Like I think that they're going to come off, whether like you could probably swirl it all in one direction and then wait till it stops and then swirl the other way so you don't mash it together, and you'd probably get just as good of results. At least in my experience, you know, there's not really a big noticeable difference between the way that you know, that you mix. Um, so yeah, at least in my experience, there's not a big, I think as long as you're just moving the material, I think like the heads are gonna fall off if it's a good plant. Now maybe if it's not as willing of a hash, you know, hashing plant, maybe, you know, maybe there is more to one of those techniques, but in my experience, it hasn't really mattered a whole lot. So
What brands of bags do you use?
I was using for the longest time I was using the bubble bags, and then I seen people using like the full mesh bags, and I was kind of waiting like for the bubble bags. Like he has them now, but while I was waiting for them to come out, I was using the like I'm using the Rosin Evolution bags,
Yeah.
and like just like the full mesh bags. I use their like their bags for making rosin. So it was like, okay, well, you know, I haven't had an issue with that, so let's try the bags out. And so yeah, those are the ones that I'm using now, and they're really affordable, you know, and yeah, and they work really well. So yeah.
Are you doubling up on any bags, or like what bags do you run?
So the wash bag would be like a 220. That'll keep all the material out, and then the first bag will be a 160. That'll just catch any leaves or any debris that got by. But usually it's a pretty nice little spoonful. Um, And then if I'm running melt, or if I'm, I'll put a 90 bag in there, or a 120, like, depending on the strains. Like for me, I'll put a 90 bag in, like to catch some more melty heads, if I want to keep melt. But usually, if it's all going to rosin, it'll just be a 73 bag. So 160, 90, 73, and then a 45. So
Do you ever run a 105?
no, I haven't run them in a long while. Mainly just because of the cultivars that I'm running. I kind of know where like the heads lie. But if you are searching like for mount, or you're running a cultivar that, a lot of people are just running for rosin, so they're not always trying to find mount. So it's just like we'll just throw like a 70 bag in there, or like a 73, catch all the good heads, and squish them. But if you are trying to find the mount strains, or trying to grade the different heads and bags, and for sure use all the bags, like a 160, like a one, I don't know what they have now, like a 140, like a 120, like 100, or like a 90, like, and then see where like the best heads are, or where like your largest yield is. And this all depends what you're looking for. So
Yeah, 100%. So what kind of water do you use? Are you just running, well water? Do you run RO or deionized?
I run RO water. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
And
I mean, there hasn't been a whole lot of, it's just like, I think that's the cleanest water. So, that's what I use. I've seen, people are always like discussing stuff. So it's always cool to pay attention to, what people are, saying, and what they're using, and what works for them and stuff, because it's definitely an ever evolving, industry and process and stuff like that. So like what's right today might not be, right tomorrow. So
for sure. No, it's always interesting. Everybody's got an opinion, and like you said, where it's evolving, and it's just having these open conversations is what's going to foster the evolution faster. Have you put any time or thought into the way that we as makers are calculating yields, and a better, is there a better way that, how are you calculating how profitable, or how much resin you're pulling off of the plant? Like, is it a resin per square foot in your mind, or is it loose resin? Like, how do you calculate your yields?
yeah, I think if people are just like honest with like what's going on, I think there'll be a lot more like continuity. I think 'cause some people are like, oh, I get, this percent, off this plant. And then it's like one guy means this percent to rosin, and one guy means this percent to hash, and one
Exactly.
guy means this percent for all the bags. One guy means just this percent just for the ones, just like the good grades. And so that's number one, is just kind of like just having clarification on that type of stuff. Like yeah, I'm getting 3.5% to 73 to 159 rosin or whatever. Just being more, just having more clarification on that. I think people would have a better understanding of that. And then what you alluded to before, like of hash, like grams, or like such amount per
Yeah,
square
like
foot
a
of your
rosin
grow.
per square foot in your grow,
Yeah,
right? How much rosin
yeah,
am I getting? How much finished saleable product, not food grade, not other things, am I getting from? And then you can really run your numbers and compare apples to apples. But I mean, when we're throwing around, these numbers, like you said, that aren't based on metrics that we have as an industry, as a group of peers have come out and said, okay, it's 45 to 159, and it's washes 1 through 3, and that's
yeah,
it. And it's what comes
yeah,
off the press, off of
yeah,
off a 25 or a 20 bag. And then, it's
yeah.
like, okay, then we can have a great, but we don't have that yet. So I think that, it's causing a lot of, I guess, misinformation that flows around, which benefits people trying to sell misinformation. So it's kind of a sad thing, but I think that we're headed to a place that's going to be able to be better. With all this breeding that's being done for solventless production, do you feel like the plant has maxed itself out as far as yields go, or do you feel that there's, a lot more that we can do when we focus on breeding for solventless production?
I think I don't know. I feel like the plants maybe reached a point with like yields, at least with certain cultivars. Um, just to go back to one thing you said before about like grams per square foot, because that's the thing is if one plant gives you twice as much mass per square foot, but half as much resin as another plant, and you're getting the same amount of resin per square foot, people have a tendency to go towards the plant that gave them a lot of resin and not taking into account that this plant, only yielded half the flower that this other one did. And that's kind of keeping some people maybe keeping certain plants in their gardens because it only washed 2% or something, but it yielded more than any of your like 4%ers or your 3%ers, right? Like, so that's super crucial to look at it, especially if you're hashing whole rooms, and a lot of people are, just to look at it as a grams per square foot. Um, and I don't think we've reached a limit as far as like, I think there's a lot of limitation when it comes to cannabis with like with indoor cultivation as far as yields and expressions. I think as it becomes more open and legal or you know tolerated in all these areas again, and it can be grown outdoors, you're going to see like a whole new stream of like cannabinoid ratios and probably terpene uh levels and content and stuff in these plants just from being grown outdoors. So I think maybe inside we've reached some sort of limitation, as far as our environments and the cultivars that we bred for these environments. But I think once we let this thing back outside, like it would be a whole different beast, like being grown in all the places that it naturally grows, but with all these kind of newer genetics mixed in and stuff like that. It's quite crazy to think about once you think about like where we're at with cannabis, and there's just pretty much been a lot of indoor up to this point. So like how much outdoor can bring.
Do you think that the mixed ratio plants are going to be recreationally sought after in the future, or do you feel as though they're going to stay more of a medicinal application?
Like higher CBD plants and
Like,
stuff,
yeah,
or
THCV, CBG, all these different more novel cannabinoids that we're seeing now with testing. Do you think that there's a recreational point where we're hunting, one-to-ones with or THC high THCV plants for recreational purposes, or do you think that that's going to stay, more medical on the medical side?
I think it might be attractive to like medical people more, like researchers and schools and stuff like that. And then once that research, once it gets out, and then it might kind of leak into the recreational and stuff like that. Because like the medical, like it's never gonna stop. Once like the more information that comes out on like like human ailments and issues and stuff, and how different parts of cannabis, all the different cannabinoids, all the different terpenes, and how they can help in these, the certain ratios or in these certain levels. There's going to be a lot of attention to, breeding those types of plants and learning more about them and all that kind of stuff. So I think it will be spearheaded by the medical side, but as always, anything from the medical side, kind of leaks over into the recreational, because depending on where you stand with it, like all use is medical use for lots of people, whether they know it or not. Lots of people just like to get like fucked up, right? But like sometimes that's like self-medicating in its own right. So I think the medical is for sure gonna be spearheading it, but yeah, I think like everyone will benefit.
Do you see it? Do you see a resurgence in medical coming in Canada? Like, I want to talk to you about the legalization through, your viewpoints and how you saw it. But right now, we're seeing medical being the only point of access or the best point of access for a patient trying to choose a legal avenue to consume the highest quality of cannabis. And like prior to recreational legalization in Canada, like the medical industry was booming, and it was and I'm of the mind that all use is medical use, but that's of my opinion, and I feel as though, you know, the same way that the banker comes home and takes 2 fingers of scotch before he can deal with his kids and his family, you know, you'd argue that he's developed that into somewhat of a medical crutch. And so, you know, I think that finding, you know, unique ways to, like, I think that what's happening now in the market is that prior to legalization, there was a strong demand in medical licenses were on the rise. Legalization came, access increased, medical license lessened, and then the true connoisseur consumers are realizing that if they want the best access to medicine, that they need to go back and reactivate their medical cards in Canada. And I think that that's, you know, prompting an interesting time where you're going to see more quality producers distributing on the medical platform, and it comes right to your door. So I think it's, you know, is that something that you would agree with, or what do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely like, it's an interesting thing, especially since like the longest time in Canada, like cannabis was synonymous with like medical, right? Like, you know, since like the court cases in, you know, 2000 or 2001, it's like, you know, there was some sort of, you know, kind of system, you know, in place, and then with like legalization, obviously, you know, that kind of got taken away. And it's not like it was a huge surprise. You just kind of wish that it didn't happen, was because the same thing happened in Washington, right? Like when they legalized recreational, like the medical went out the door, and you have these people, you know, essentially these caregivers who have built these relationships with these patients over the years, you know, being their support group through their, you know, through their treatments for whatever they're going through, of why they're using cannabis, and, you know, helping them find the different cannabis for, you know, what they're dealing with, and having that kind of like relationship, that, you know, that became illegal, you know. And we saw the same thing happen here. And, you know, it all stems from the fact that the government of Canada still doesn't recognize cannabis as a medicine. A lot of people don't realize that the only reason we have a medical system in Canada is because of the courts. The courts made the government make like a medical system. So that's why we have it here. So when we legalized it recreational, it was like, okay, now it's like a product that adults use like alcohol, but we're still not recognizing that it's a medicine. So you go into a store, you know, into a rec shop, and you can't talk about, you know, any medical uses with someone, because this isn't a medical dispensary. This is for recreational. I can tell you the THC content, I can tell you the terp content, but I can't tell you if it's going to help you sleep. I can't tell you if it's going to help with your pain. I can't tell you, you know, anything to do with medical. And that's a huge issue. Like you said, people don't have a place to go, you know, or when they're trying to consume quality medicine, they have to, you know, get their med card and stuff. But then they're going to find out a lot of these, you know, like medical growers became LPs, you know, and they became recreational growers, to where, you know, these patients can't even access that medicine anymore. But like there's a huge gap in Canada for the medical scene, that, you know, it doesn't have to be in the recreational shops. Have different stores for, you know, for medical, but allow people to talk about it. Allow people to develop a relationship with a knowledgeable bud tender, who's going to direct them in the right direction, who's going to allow them to return their bud when it didn't give them the effects that they want. Allow them to do, and not have to go through a doctor that goes through some, you know, you know, PowerPoint presentation on, you know, on like cannabis and how to, you know, how to prescribe it. Like, let them form a relationship with these, you know, people who have been around the plants, who have the direct experience, who maybe have the same ailments and all that type of stuff. So there's a huge gap.
And that
I
system
don't.
existed in British Columbia prior to legalization. More
Yeah, the
people,
compassion clubs. Yeah.
more non-cannabis users got turned on in those years when those compassion clubs doors were open than after legalization, because of the sterility and what Blowjoke Smoke's referring to as far as the limitations on the medical aspects of cannabis. I mean, when effect is what we talk about, effect is what we chase as consumers. You know, every cultivar has a different effect, and when you're not allowed to convey that to your consumers, you're really left with more than one hand tied behind your back. So I think that, you know, that's an issue, and it can only be solved through the medical. It can only be solved right now the way that Canada is set up. It can only be solved by reactivating your medical license and seeking advice through medical platforms and avenues. So I think it's a really it's a flawed system, but it's what we have. I want to ask you, I want to kind of rewind it a bit and go leading up to legalization, you know, 2018, 2017, 2018, you know, what were your thoughts of what legalization was going to be versus the reality when it actually took place?
Well, having paid close attention to, like, obviously everyone paid close attention to Washington, you know, and Colorado. I think that was 2012 or 2012 in Washington, I think 2014 in Colorado or something. But, you know, like, you pay attention to it and you're kind of like, okay, the system in Washington, I don't really like that. I hope that doesn't happen here. And then you look at Colorado and you're like, okay, well, this one seems a little better. Um, you know, maybe we'll develop something like the Colorado setup. Um, I think, like a lot of people, you're super hopeful that it was going to be like a really good system as far as like allowing, you know, current people in the system to participate, as far as it kind of being more streamlined and less politics and all that kind of stuff. But having seen what happened in, you know, Washington and Denver and stuff like that, you kind of had like I had kind of, you know, kind of lower expectations, and I kind of thought it was kind of going to go how it did. Maybe not as bad as far as like the quality of stuff to start, because I had stuff from the medical guys who switched, or some of them switched over to the to be licensed producers, and I knew there could be quality, but yeah, I didn't think it was going to be that bad. But as far as like the politics and letting legacy people play and all that kind of stuff, I didn't have high hopes for that kind of stuff. I kind of learned, yeah, from watching like the States and kind of just, you know, like that whole like growing up and realizing how the world is, and like, you know, how it's, you know, how certain things control certain things, and yeah, it was kind of like, you know, like all the, you know, like the hippie in you is like, okay, they're gonna let me into their world, but the reality is that you're letting like all of these business guys, all these non-cannabis guys into your world, right? So, and that's kind of what happened. So it wasn't it wasn't like, yeah, I don't have a lot of like feelings towards certain things. So it was pretty neutral. It was like, yeah, this is what's happening. You know, like I participated in any, you know, in any surveys, you know, that were out there, and kind of gave my voice, you know, where I could. But you know, there's only a whole lot that, you know, that you can do. Um, but yeah, I didn't have high hopes for it. Kind of went the way I thought it was going to. But obviously, like, you never really know. Um, so it seems to be trending in a way better direction. So that's something to look forward to for sure.
Yeah. We're starting to see legacy participants slowly move into positions of power. I think, you know, 2 years ago, there was a recognition that there was some value to legacy intelligence, but they'd hire the legacy guy to have him on staff, but they wouldn't let him into the meeting, you know, or they'd let him into the meeting, but they wouldn't let him talk. And so
Right.
think that now those guys are actually taking control of those companies and restarting those defunct projects. And so we're starting to see a changing of the guard. And also we're starting to see people utilize licenses in new ways. You know, I think that when it first came out, and I know I'm guilty of this, that I thought that if I wanted to do something, I needed the license that you would need to do that. And now people are realizing that you don't need that license. You just need somebody with that license.
Right.
If something value, they have that license, then you can negotiate some type of amicable relationship where you're utilizing their facility and their license, and you're able to leverage or bring your brand to market. And so I think we're going to start seeing this creative way, which is really silly. It's like what should have happened and what's going to happen is like we're learning how to swim with our handcuffed to our ankle. But I mean, the solution is just take the handcuff off. But if you're not going to take the handcuff off, then we'll learn a new way to swim. And that is bringing those legacy brands in through partnerships with these existing facilities that are failing on their faces. A, produce anything of quality, and B, produce anything that resonates with a consumer group. And so I think that that's a real opportunity for brands like yourself and a number of other individuals to come in and claim the space. Because what I don't want to see is you know, and respect to all the US OGs, but I don't want to see your brands in Canada. I want to see Canadian brands in Canada. I want to see Canadian legacy brands in Canada. So we have our own flavor. The East has its own flavor. The West has its own flavor. And you can travel around and you're not like, oh, this is just, you know, this is McDonald's. Like it's the same thing up here as it is down there. I'm not interested in that whatsoever. So I'm really hoping that comes forward, and, you know, every company kind of champions or picks up a legacy group there that they align with and continues that brand and builds that instead of looking south for inspiration. Because I haven't seen a single brand that's resonated with me that has been created since legalization. You know, Supreme did a good job. They spent, you know, an insane amount on advertising, and they leveraged off the Supreme clothing brand. And so I can't really commend anybody except, you know, you took something that was hot, you changed it enough so you weren't going to get sued, and then you leaned into it. So,
I mean, that pretty much sounds like the game plan, like for most people, if you think about it.
Yeah,
and I mean, like on one hand, you can't blame them, but on the other hand, it's like there's so many like original ideas out there. I think even if you have a good product, I think people are scared to maybe be original or kind of stand on its own because you don't believe in the product enough, even if you should, because like for me, like I wouldn't, like, it's not about the brand name. Like if you're doing something right, you can do it right wherever, right? So it's not like, oh, like if it's not called Living Earth Organics, like then it's not good. Well, it's like, well, what if I made it under a different brand and I'm doing everything the same?
It's you.
Like you're the brand. It's still me, right? So, and that's like the intellectual property, right? And that's what a lot of people are super protective of. So although these avenues and stuff have opened up, which are definitely necessary, I mean, like you said, it's learning to swim with the handcuffs on, because, you know, like the easy way would just be to let everyone, you know, play and
let everyone
play at the scale that they can.
Lower the barrier to entry, let everybody come in and survival of the fittest, but they're not going to do that. So
no, for sure. Because even if you look at alcohol brands, like they're allowed to do that, and then they get consumed by the larger brands. So even if that was what they want to do, like it would even benefit the larger companies to allow these small brands to come in, build something great, then you buy it. Either it's a partnership, or, you know, it's a subdivision, or, you know, it's just total a takeover. But like, you know, that would be an option too, because a lot of people's goals are to build a company that gets bought by a larger company. Like a lot of people don't understand that. That's a lot of people's goals, is to just build a company that gets bought by like a larger guy, and then they cash out and then they sit on the beach. Like a lot of people don't want to build something that they see around for 20-30 years, right? So that's where a lot of like legacy guys, you know, like especially before legalization, you didn't know when it was coming. Like you're kind of like, I'm in it for the long haul. Like, you know, I'm committed, where a lot, maybe some people aren't. And that's where like partnering up becomes difficult. You know, building these relationships become difficult because, you know, being from like, you know, the other side and having to deal with things of the way that you did, you know, not suit and ties, you know, not office rooms, you know, like parking lots and, you know, like dark buildings and like, you know, weird streets and all that type of stuff. Like doing that kind of stuff, you have a different like approach to it, as far as like you're way more guarded, obviously, right? So, you know, that can limit it, but it's nice to see, you know, certain partnerships, you know, forming, and hopefully, you know, they continue trending in like the right direction, because unfortunately I've already, you know, I've seen a few, you know, where it goes south before anything can even happen, you know, and that's a lot of energy, you know, and not you know, even the money side of it, but it's just like that's just so much energy and time put into something, you know, that doesn't make it. So for a lot of people, it's hard to make that transition over, especially when they have something that's going pretty well, right? So it would be, you know, cool to open the doors up a little bit more, you know, so it's nice to see that.
I mean, you know, let's really dig into that. If you are operating successfully in the legacy market and you're looking at transitioning into the legal space right now, you are making that decision based upon future value, not present value of that decision, because you will not be able to make anywhere near what you're making in the legacy space. And you're going to look at, you know, maybe breaking even on a functional business after a few years of investment. So I think that, you know, the road to a profitable business on something that should be profitable out of a 4x4 tent is laughable. You know, the ability that most of Canada, you have to have a provincial government worker approve your new product that you're bringing to market. Like, is it not risk enough being a small business owner, investing in a new product, deciding you're going to risk and then losing it all on it not working, but you actually have to do that and then ask somebody if you can take it to market, and that person holds your life in their hands and says
Yeah.
no, and then you don't even know if that product would work or not. Like, you know, you're mentioning the opportunity if it was the other way, like alcohol, where these small businesses could come in, then flourish, then get bought up. Well, those small businesses are proving grounds. They're proving out, oh, there is a market for fruity beers. All right,
Yeah.
heavy
Yeah.
into fruity beers. And so
Yeah.
I think that, you know, it's crazy how well cannabis does with all the roadblocks that get thrown ahead of it, because you've got, you know, a lot of a strong undercurrent pushing it forward. But there's, you know, if you really were able to get the powers that be to be motivated to let cannabis proliferate, in 5 years, you could have this thing insanely normalized. If it was the prerogative of the majority to do this, it would be,
Yeah.
you know, because the fact that we're 3 years into Canada and we don't have a place to publicly, we can't legally have a place to publicly congregate and consume it, I mean,
Yeah.
is comment enough. I mean, it's not, oh no, we treat that consumer group the same as other groups. No, you don't. No, there's
Yeah.
no other
Yeah.
group that is allowed to do what they like to congregate and do, but is not allowed to congregate and do it. And they can only
Yeah.
do it in the privacy of their own home or in specific areas, but they can't have a business around, like, you know, there's even tobacco shops with private cigar lounges here. So you
Yeah.
can't even say that.
Yeah.
Um,
It's just uh like the legislation we were talking about to even be a producer. Like there's so many gaps and holes in like the legalization in Canada that it doesn't even, like, it seems like saying half baked is like too nice. It was like a quarter baked idea, you know, when it came out, and it's almost like, hey, how can a few of my friends get rich off of selling weed for the country, you know? And then they have these, you know, guys making these rules to benefit them, And that's what was crazy is Canada did like a 2-year research thing. They sent teams out to Colorado. They sent teams out to Washington. They did all this kind of stuff. Those places have consumption lounges. They saw how it worked. They have tour buses doing that stuff in Colorado. Like they saw that it worked and they chose not to do it. Basically, is what it comes down to. So it's like, why do you have these gaps in it? Why is there no place to consume? Like obviously, if you have a private establishment, that's the only way that you could set this kind of thing up, but then it's not how you want it to be set up. Like, could you imagine a private, like a private bar, to where like, it's not like a public, yeah, so we're not there yet with that kind of stuff. And that's, super upsetting that you still have to be, like you kind of have to, I don't know what the term would be, but yeah, you have to find a way to make it happen, and it's still illegal, to like hang out and smoke together, or whatever in a public space or, something like that. So like there being no medical setup, there being no like consumption lounges are two huge gaps, along with, like the roadblocks to become, a producer, even to have a store, all that kind of stuff. It shouldn't be super easy to get into, but it should obviously be easier than it is. Like, people who want to do it can't get into it, and that's, kind of an issue. So
what where do you see it going? Where do you see how do you see the next 3 years playing out?
if I'm completely honest, not a whole lot different than the last 3 years. I mean, I don't know. I'm not super tapped in on the inside. I don't. There's nothing really that's going like, hey, we got all this, information, and we're going to implement it. All these new systems. Like, it seems like it's pretty much going to trend the way that it is. Obviously, hopefully, they allow, like direct to store, sales for producers. So there's no middleman, like here in Alberta with AGLC, like that just adds a whole lot of issues to it, obviously. So hopefully small stuff like that gets changed. But yeah, if I'm honest, I don't see it being a whole lot different. Obviously, I hope it's a whole lot different, you know. But yeah, I can't see it getting, worse. It'll be, I guess I'm not super into politics, but it will be interesting to see what happens, if something with with the politics in Canada changes, whether a party or a leader, it'd be interesting to see where the next person took it, whether they decided to backtrack on stuff or whether to open it up more. So I think that'll lead to the biggest changes. I don't see a whole lot happening up until like the next election, so.
No, that's a fair assessment, man. I mean, that's a fair, I would say, a fair observation and fair assessment. I wanted to ask you what your plans, like, what are your aspirations with Blowtoke Smoke? Do you want to become a larger, more well-known brand? Do you want to remain small and keep doing your thing? Like, what do you envision for Blowtoke?
I mean, like right now with what I'm doing, I really enjoy being like, a producer for, for the patients that I am a producer for. I like the experience that I get right now of like being able to directly communicate with every, patient, and, hear their experiences, hear their feedbacks, all that type of stuff. And I think that's obviously once you scale up to a certain point, maybe, that becomes obsolete, whether it's like legacy or like legacy medical or recreational. But yeah, I really enjoy that. I don't think a whole lot about, um, I need this to happen or I need that to happen. Obviously, if the right thing, comes across your plate, you kind of look at it and, there's been, a handful, of opportunities. Um, so, but it's one of those things where they were not kind of like, they wouldn't allow me to do what I want to do, right? I know that's probably what a lot of people's issue is. Oh, they just want me to fucking water the plants or, whatever. But like, you know, um, that's obviously a big thing. Like if you don't value your own intellectual property, like how can you expect someone else to, right? So if they just see you as, someone who waters, or they just see you as someone who stirs ice in a bucket, or they just see you as that kind of stuff, right? Then you're probably not going to get, fully valued there. So I don't see, as far as answering your question, I don't see it anywhere in particular. I just hope that I'm around the plant, and I get to, continue doing what I'm doing, hopefully on, on the same level, maybe bigger, but something that allows me to keep the quality up, you know, and, keep everything super proper. I'm just about consistency and like a good product. And however I can do that on whatever level, I'm super down to do that, so yeah, that's kind of, that's kind of where I'm at. Like nothing in particular, but yeah.
Not trying to push anything, but open to opportunities. I mean, it's good to know. I mean,
Yes.
people probably some people probably listening to this would want to know. So, I mean, as we kind of wrap up here, what advice do you have for guys who want to follow in your footsteps, who, are see you and are on the come up? What advice do you have to the young hash maker?
I mean, to me, it all starts with and for everything in life, it starts with a good attitude. But like, just like good material, like, if you're not producing the material yourself, like if you're not growing it, form good relationships with good growers, right? So you have access to consistent material. And like with anything, with me, like knowledge is power. Like never think that you know enough. Continue to consume content that that inspires you and that gives you information. Like people talk about diet, I mean food and what they drink, but a lot of us consume a lot of content, whether it be podcasts, YouTube videos, TV shows, whatever. All that kind of stuff feeds into how you're operating. So consume lots of hash content, consume lots of hash making videos and like how to's, and it's super important to experiment with stuff, and don't be afraid to fail and make mistakes, because you'll generally learn a lot more in your failures and mistakes than you will in your successes. So if you can fail early on and do it gracefully, I like to say form a good relationship with failure, and like you'll go far. So
dude, I think that's some really sound advice. For the people watching, where's the best place if they want to get in touch with you? Where's the best place to reach you?
You can reach me at Blow Toke Smoke on Instagram. That's the best place to reach me. I answer every single DM, so don't be afraid to reach out, and I don't hide anything. I'm an open book on growing, watering, hash making, yada yada, because I know that the blueprint is only 10% of it. The other 90% is you actually doing it. So I have no problem giving people the blueprint, because the people that are going to utilize it are the people that are actually going to do the work, and they deserve the results that they're going to get with that information. So I've never been scared to tell people how I wash, my freeze dryer settings, my water settings, whatever. Like it doesn't matter, because I don't think that's the secret code. I think like the secret sauce is just putting in the work and being consistent. So
100%. Well, man, Nathan, I appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate you coming on, and we're definitely going to have you back on again soon.
Awesome, man. Thank you again for having me on. I loved it.
Absolutely, man. We're going to do it again soon. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll catch you next episode.